The First World War did not just reshape Europe, it completely transformed the Middle East, a region that had been under Ottoman rule for centuries. Imagine a world where vast empires governed lands stretching from modern-day Turkey to Iraq, Syria, and beyond. Tribes, cities, and communities coexisted under the Ottoman system, their lives intertwined through centuries-old traditions, trade networks, and local loyalties. Then, in 1914, everything changed. As the war raged, the Ottoman Empire began to crumble, leaving a power vacuum that European nations were all too eager to fill. Britain, France, and even Germany had designs on the region, each pursuing their own strategic interests. By the end of the war, old empires had vanished, and new states appeared almost overnight, states whose borders were often drawn far from the lands themselves, in distant European capitals, with little consideration for the people who lived there. But these borders were not just lines on a map, they were the beginning of a century-long story of conflict, alliances, and tensions that continue to influence the Middle East today. Communities that had coexisted for generations were suddenly divided or forced to navigate new political realities. Promises made during wartime, often contradictory, created expectations that were impossible to fully satisfy. In this documentary, we will explore how the decisions made during and after we set the stage for modern Middle Eastern conflicts. From revolts and uprisings to the roots of the Israel-Palestine tensions and beyond, we will uncover the stories of leaders, soldiers, and ordinary people whose lives were forever changed, and show how history's ripple effects continue to shape the region. If you are fascinated by history and want to understand the forces that shape today's world, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our in-depth explorations into history's most pivotal moments. You won't want to miss a single detail of this story. As the Ottoman Empire teetered on the edge of collapse during the First World War, the Middle East became a chessboard for global powers, each maneuvering to secure influence over a region of immense strategic importance. Britain, keenly aware of the empire's own vulnerabilities and the crucial route to India via the Suez Canal, saw an opportunity to reshape the political landscape to its advantage. In this high-stakes environment, promises were made, loyalties courted, and secrets negotiated, often with little regard for the lives and aspirations of the people who actually lived there. One of the most consequential of these promises was made to the Hashemite family, the ruling household of the Hijaz. Sharif Hussein Ibali, a respected leader and descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, was approached by British officials with a tantalizing offer. If he led an Arab revolt against Ottoman rule, his family would be rewarded with a future independent Arab kingdom. The deal, carefully couched in language of honor and liberation, ignited hopes among Arab nationalists who yearned for self-determination, a concept that was gaining traction but was still unfamiliar in many parts of the region. Yet, while Britain appeared to be the champion of Arab aspirations, behind closed doors a different story was unfolding. At the same time that promises were extended to the Hashemites, British diplomats were negotiating secretly with their French counterparts to divide the spoils of the Ottoman Empire. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, concluded in 1916, outlined spheres of influence in the Middle East, designating vast areas of land to French and British control, with Palestine earmarked for international administration. This clandestine arrangement directly contradicted the assurances given to the Arabs, creating a web of competing expectations and inevitable tensions. Adding another layer of complexity, Britain also declared support for the Zionist movement in Palestine through the Balfour Declaration of 1917, committing to the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people, though ambiguously phrased to avoid immediate conflict with the Arab population. The result was a region caught in the crossfire of promises that could not coexist. each decision made with the immediate goal of winning the war rather than creating a stable post-war order. For ordinary people, the consequences were profound and often tragic. Arab tribes rallied behind Hussein's revolt, inspired by visions of an independent kingdom, while communities in Palestine and elsewhere braced themselves for changes that were dictated not by local consensus, but by distant diplomats. The overlapping agreements fostered an environment of distrust and disillusionment. What had been a centuries-old imperial system was replaced by an unstable patchwork of mandates and spheres of influence, each promising progress but delivering uncertainty. Leaders who had once wielded influence under Ottoman rule now found themselves negotiating with foreign powers, mediating between nationalist aspirations and the practical realities imposed by European ambitions, and attempting to navigate the contradictions of promises that were destined to collide. This period set the stage for decades of political tension and conflict, as the seeds sown in the drawing rooms of London, Paris, and Cairo took root in the daily lives of the people across the region. Borders that were meant to organize territories instead divided communities, while ideological commitments Arab independence, Zionist settlement, and European spheres of influence intertwined in ways that made compromise increasingly elusive. The Middle East, once governed under a unified empire with local autonomy and traditional hierarchies, now faced the challenge of reconciling the ambitions of external powers with the desires of diverse populations who had long defined their identities through religion, tribe, and region rather than nation-state concepts. In these years, the stage was set for a century of contested sovereignty, cultural friction, and intermittent conflict, revealing how decisions made in secrecy and diplomacy, however well-intentioned or strategically expedient at the time, could reverberate for generations, shaping the history and struggles of an entire region. Amid the promises, secret agreements, and shifting borders, the people of the Middle East found themselves confronting a world that was changing faster than they could comprehend. Arab, Jewish, Kurdish, and other communities all harbored aspirations for self-determination, inspired by a vision of nationhood that had begun to capture the imagination of political thinkers and intellectuals. Yet the reality on the ground was far more complicated than the abstract ideals of diplomats and revolutionaries. For most inhabitants, identity was rooted not in a modern conception of nationhood, but in deeply ingrained bonds of tribe, religion, or local region, each providing a framework for loyalty, social order, and survival that had endured for generations. While the idea of creating states based on national identity was championed by foreign powers and emerging nationalist elites, the majority of people continued to navigate their daily lives according to older, more familiar structures, often finding themselves at odds with the expectations imposed from above. In Arab towns and villages, the promises of independence and self-rule inspired hope but also confusion, as many were unsure whether the Hashemite-led revolt truly represented their interests, or if it was simply another layer of external manipulation. Jewish communities, some recently immigrated to Palestine and others long established, looked toward the British-backed Zionist project with both hope and apprehension, recognizing the potential for cultural revival, but also sensing the friction it would inevitably generate with their Arab neighbors. Kurdish populations, spread across mountainous regions and divided by new colonial boundaries, faced the daunting task of pursuing their own autonomy within a framework entirely foreign to their tribal and regional networks. Each group, while animated by its own aspirations, encountered the same challenge. The political promises of self-determination often collided with the practical realities of a population whose loyalties were layered, overlapping, and resistant to sudden redefinition. This tension became evident in the uprisings, negotiations, and small-scale conflicts that erupted across the region after the war. Tribes that had historically aligned with the Ottomans now weighed the potential benefits and dangers of joining nationalist movements, often calculating their decisions based on local rivalries, resource access, and survival strategies rather than abstract ideals of independence. Cities such as Jerusalem, Beirut, and Damascus became microcosms of the broader struggle, where ethnic, religious, and economic interests intersected, revealing the complexity of creating a coherent national identity overnight. Leaders who sought to rally support for new states had to negotiate not only with foreign powers, but also with communities whose sense of belonging transcended the lines drawn on a map, making the task of forging unity a delicate balancing act fraught with uncertainty. The disparity between the ambitions of nationalist movements and the lived reality of the people shaped the emerging Middle Eastern states in profound ways. Expectations for rapid self-governance clashed with the administrative and military priorities of Britain and France, whose mandates sought to manage the region indirectly while asserting control over strategic territories. Ordinary citizens experienced this dissonance firsthand, caught between promises of a better future and the immediate pressures of foreign administration. Land disputes and intercommunal tensions. These contradictions planted the seeds of long-term instability, as the push for national identity could not easily reconcile with the deep-seated local affiliations that had defined social life for centuries. In the process, the Middle East became a region where the dreams of nationhood and self-determination existed alongside enduring tribal, religious, and regional loyalties, complex interplay that continues to shape political, cultural, and social realities to this day, illustrating how history's grand designs often confront the enduring resilience of human traditions and identity. With the guns of the First World War finally silenced, the task of reconstructing the Middle East fell into the hands of diplomats and international bodies who had little first-hand understanding of the region's intricate social fabric. The League of Nations, established to maintain peace and prevent future global conflicts, sought to provide a framework for post-war governance. Yet its decisions often reflected the competing interests of powerful European nations rather than the desires of local populations. Through the mandate system, Britain and France were granted indirect control over the territories that had once been under Ottoman rule, tasked with guiding these lands toward eventual independence while simultaneously safeguarding their own strategic and economic interests. To the people living there, however, this guidance often felt like another layer of foreign domination, a continuation of the same external oversight they had experienced under centuries of Ottoman authority. In Mesopotamia, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, the mandates were implemented with varying degrees of direct intervention and local accommodation. Yet in all cases, the promises of eventual sovereignty were clouded by the realities of European power. British administrators in Iraq and Palestine imposed new bureaucracies, restructured local governance, and encouraged settlement policies that reflected British political and economic priorities more than the aspirations of indigenous communities. France, tasked with overseeing Syria and Lebanon, moved to solidify control through military presence and administrative restructuring, redrawing borders and creating political entities that often ignored existing cultural and sectarian lines. The mandates, while presented as instruments of progress and preparation for self-rule, frequently created resentment as local populations struggled to reconcile their traditional ways of life with the foreign-imposed structures that now governed them. The implementation of the mandates also exposed the limitations of the League of Nations' idealistic principles. While international law emphasized the need to consider the wishes of the people, surveys and petitions, such as those collected by the American King Crane Commission, revealed widespread opposition to foreign control and skepticism toward European promises of independence. In Palestine, opposition to Zionist settlement under British supervision underscored the tensions between competing national and religious identities, illustrating that the theoretical framework of mandates could not easily resolve deep-seated social and political conflicts. In Iraq, the British faced uprisings that combined tribal resistance with nationalist sentiment, forcing them to negotiate the delicate balance between maintaining authority and recognizing the limits of imposed control. Across the region, the mandates created a paradox. While European powers were responsible for preparing these lands for self-governance, they were often reluctant to relinquish authority fully, resulting in a fragile political order prone to unrest, dispute, and occasional violence. Yet amid these tensions, the Mandate period also laid the groundwork for the eventual formation of modern nation-states. Providing infrastructure. Administrative experience, and in some cases, education systems that would later support independent governance. It was a period defined by contradiction, foreign supervision framed as benevolent guidance, promises of autonomy entwined with the exercise of control, and local resistance that revealed both the persistence of traditional loyalties and the emerging desire for national identity. In many, the League of Nations mandates reflected the broader challenges of post-war reconstruction, showing that while international ideals could set a vision for the future, they could not erase the complex histories, identities, and aspirations of the people who lived at the heart of the Middle East. This period of mandates, with all its promises and contradictions, became a defining chapter in the story of the region, influencing political structures, intercommunal relations, and the enduring quest for sovereignty that continues to shape the Middle East today. The imposition of foreign control across the Middle East after the First World War, whether through the mandates in Iraq, Palestine, Syria, or Lebanon, ignited a wave of unrest that would leave lasting marks on the region's history. In Iraq, the British struggled to impose authority over a population that had long defined itself through tribal affiliations, religious loyalties, and Ottoman administrative traditions, only to find their efforts met with fierce resistance. The 1920 Iraqi revolt began as a localized dispute over the imprisonment of a tribal leader, but quickly spread across the Middle Euphrates, uniting disparate tribes and urban communities against what they saw as an alien administration imposing decisions without consent. Cities like Najaf and Karbala became centers of rebellion, while British garrisons faced sieges and repeated attacks, forcing the empire to recognize that military dominance alone could not secure stability. This revolt, though eventually suppressed, exposed the deep misalignment between the expectations of colonial authorities and the realities of a society that valued autonomy, honor, and self-determination over distant promises of progress. In Palestine, tensions between Jewish settlers encouraged by British policies and the Arab majority escalated rapidly, fueled by conflicting promises and the influx of a population determined to reclaim an ancestral homeland. Early settlements brought not only new economic activity, but also disputes over land ownership, access to resources, and political representation, creating a climate of mistrust and sporadic violence. Riots erupted in towns such as Jaffa, where clashes between Jewish and Arab communities demonstrated the combustible mix of national aspirations, economic competition, and resentment toward perceived favoritism by the colonial administration. British authorities attempted to mediate, but their dual commitment to facilitating Zionist settlement while maintaining order only intensified suspicions on both sides, leaving ordinary citizens caught in a cycle of fear, retaliation, and insecurity. Further north, in Syria and Lebanon, French ambitions sparked resistance among Arab nationalists who had envisioned independence under leaders like Faisal. The creation of Greater Lebanon, which combined predominantly Christian Mount Lebanon with surrounding Muslim districts, disrupted traditional social balances and provoked political opposition. the Syrian National Congress and other nationalist groups challenged French authority, determined to assert control over territories that were promised to Arab leaders during the war. The Battle of Maysalon in 1920 became a symbol of the struggle, where a ragtag Arab army faced the disciplined forces of France, ultimately losing the battle but leaving a legacy of heroism and a touchstone for nationalist sentiment. Across the region, these revolts and riots revealed a common thread. The people of the Middle East were not passive recipients of European designs, whether motivated by tribal pride, religious identity, economic interests, or nationalist ideals. Local populations actively contested the imposition of foreign authority, demonstrating that political agreements made in distant capitals could not erase centuries of social and cultural structures. The conflicts also illustrated the unintended consequences of wartime promises, as overlapping commitments to Arab independence, Zionist settlement, and colonial administration collided on the ground, producing instability that would echo for decades. In these early years after the war, the Middle East became a landscape of tension and resistance, where ordinary men and women, tribal leaders and urban intellectuals alike navigated the pressures of occupation, the allure of independence, and the uncertainties of a region being reshaped by forces far beyond its borders. These struggles, though often tragic in immediate consequences, laid the foundation for the modern political realities of the Middle East, demonstrating both the resilience of its people and the enduring impact of decisions made in the corridors of power far away. The period following the First World War saw Palestine transformed from a province of the Ottoman Empire into a focal point of competing ambitions, as waves of Jewish immigrants arrived under British encouragement, seeking to establish a homeland while navigating the complex realities of a region already populated by a majority Arab community. The British Mandate, framed as a means of preparing the territory for eventual self-governance, also carried the weight of promises embedded in the Balfour Declaration, signaling support for a Jewish national home. To the immigrants, many of whom arrived with the hope of escaping persecution and rebuilding a cultural and spiritual homeland, the land represented both opportunity and destiny. Agricultural settlements were established, cities began to expand, and a nascent infrastructure was built to accommodate a growing population, fostering an environment of economic growth and communal development. Yet this influx of settlers also created tension with the Arab majority, who had lived for generations in these same lands and now faced profound changes in land ownership, labor competition, and political influence. Economic friction quickly emerged as Jewish immigrants, often supported by international organizations and local funds, purchased land and introduced modern farming techniques, transforming previously uncultivated or underutilized areas into productive settlements. While these changes brought certain material benefits, such as employment opportunities and infrastructure improvements, they also displaced local Arab tenants and farmers, undermining traditional livelihoods and fueling resentment. Political tension compounded these economic strains, as the British administration, while professing neutrality, frequently appeared to favor the interests of the new settlers, granting them access to resources, protection, and legal advantages that deepened perceptions of inequality. In towns and cities, disputes over water, property, and governance became increasingly common, illustrating how demographic shifts could transform everyday interactions into flashpoints of broader political significance. These dynamics set the stage for a cycle of conflict that would intensify over the following decades, as each community sought to assert its vision for the future. Arab leaders and intellectuals voiced growing concern over the implications of sustained Jewish immigration, warning that the social fabric of Palestine was being irrevocably altered and that the aspirations of the indigenous population were being sidelined in favor of external objectives. At the same time, Jewish leaders, inspired by both historical claims and contemporary political movements, pursued settlement and political organization with determination, creating institutions and networks that would serve as the foundation for eventual statehood. The clash of these visions, fueled by economic pressures, social displacement, and competing narratives of historical and cultural legitimacy, crystallized a conflict that was as much about identity and belonging as it was about land and resources. What unfolded in Palestine during this era illustrates how foreign policies, demographic change, and local realities can intersect to create tensions with long-lasting consequences. The British attempt to navigate their dual obligations supporting Zionist aspirations while maintaining order among the Arab majority proved increasingly untenable, as neither side was willing to compromise on its fundamental objectives. The resulting friction, manifesting in sporadic riots, political lobbying, and communal mistrust, laid the groundwork for a series of conflicts that would continue to define the region throughout the 20th century and into the present day. By examining the early decades of the British Mandate, one can see the origins of the Israel-Palestine dispute not merely as a political struggle, but as a deeply human story of competing hopes, fears, and the enduring complexities of coexistence in a land where history, identity, and aspiration converge in ways that resist easy resolution. As the smoke of the First World War cleared and European powers sought to consolidate their influence over the former Ottoman territories, a patchwork of new kingdoms and states emerged across the Middle East, often shaped more by diplomatic expedients than by the realities on the ground. The kingdoms of Iraq and Transjordan came into existence under British oversight, while Greater Lebanon and French-controlled Syria reflected France's strategic and sectarian calculations, designed to secure influence and mitigate unrest among the diverse populations. These political entities were frequently defined by artificial borders that ignored the intricate tapestry of tribal, religious, and ethnic affiliations that had long structured life in the region. Mountains, rivers, and deserts, which had once delineated spheres of influence among local communities, were now overlaid with straight lines and arbitrary divisions drawn in distant capitals, creating administrative units that were internally fragmented and often at odds with local identities. In Iraq, the British faced the challenge of uniting Shia, Sunni, and Kurdish populations under a single monarchy led by King Faisal, a leader whose authority derived both from foreign backing and wartime promises rather than universal local support. Urban centers such as Baghdad and Basra had experienced Ottoman administration and trade networks for centuries, while rural tribes maintained independence and local customs that did not always align with national governance. This tension between centralized authority and decentralized loyalties fueled unrest, as tribal leaders and religious figures navigated a political landscape where the British sought to impose order while simultaneously preparing for a symbolic transition to self-rule. Transjordan, under Faisal's brother Abdullah, faced similar dilemmas, attempting to balance tribal autonomy with the creation of a functioning state apparatus, all while existing as a semi-independent entity under British guidance rather than full sovereignty. To the north, the French approach to Syria and Lebanon compounded the challenges of governing mixed populations. Greater Lebanon was constructed by attaching predominantly Muslim districts to Christian Mount Lebanon, creating a state with a deliberately heterogeneous demographic, designed in part to secure the influence of the Maronite Christian community while diluting the power of larger Arab Muslim populations. French forces established administrative structures and boundaries that often ignored centuries of local interdependence. Trade networks and social hierarchies. In Syria, nationalist aspirations clashed with French strategic priorities, as groups that had expected independence under Faisal's wartime agreements found themselves subordinated to colonial authority. The Battle of Maysalon in 1920 exemplified the consequences of these tensions, as the defeat of the nascent Syrian army by French forces became both a symbolic and practical demonstration of foreign imposition over local self-determination, cementing a legacy of distrust and resistance. Across the region, the creation of these new political entities revealed the difficulty of transplanting European models of statehood onto a landscape defined by centuries of fluid allegiances and local autonomy. Artificial borders and mixed populations meant that governance required constant negotiation, compromise, and sometimes coercion, as rulers attempted to balance the demands of diverse communities with the expectations of the colonial powers that had placed them in authority. Economic disparities, sectarian divisions, and regional rivalries, already present in varying degrees, were exacerbated by these externally imposed frameworks, producing fault lines that would continue to influence conflicts, uprisings, and political maneuvering for decades to come. Yet within this fragile system, seeds of identity, nationalism, and political awareness began to take root. Leaders and communities learned to navigate the imposed structures, seeking opportunities to assert influence, protect interests, and negotiate power within the new kingdoms and mandates. The legacies of these early post-war settlements remain visible today, as modern Middle Eastern borders, social dynamics, and political challenges continue to reflect the complex interplay between historical identities and the artificial constructs created in the aftermath of the First World War, highlighting how decisions made in distant capitals could reverberate across generations and shape the fate of millions. As we reflect on the profound transformations that swept across the Middle East in the wake of the First World War, it becomes clear that the decisions made during and immediately after the conflict cast long shadows that continue to shape the region today. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the imposition of European mandates, the promises made to competing communities, and the creation of new kingdoms with artificial borders all combined to form a political landscape that was inherently fragile, often contested, and frequently at odds with the social and cultural realities of the people who lived there. Revolts riots in Palestine, resistance in Syria and Lebanon, and the tensions created by Jewish immigration under British encouragement were not isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a broader challenge: the attempt to overlay modern nation-state structures on centuries-old societies that had evolved according to very different principles of identity, loyalty, and governance. The mandates, while nominally designed to prepare the region for independence, often resulted in an uneasy compromise in which Britain and France exercised real power, while local populations were left to navigate the contradictions between expectation and reality. Promises of self-determination clashed with strategic and economic interests, creating enduring grievances that would feed nationalist movements, social unrest, and future conflicts. The new kingdoms of Iraq, Transjordan, Greater Lebanon, and the French-controlled Syria carried within them the seeds of long-term instability, as artificial borders brought together communities with divergent identities, histories, and aspirations, forcing leaders and citizens alike to confront the complexities of coexistence under structures not of their choosing. Even as modern nation-states eventually emerged, the legacies of these early post-war arrangements persisted. Patterns of intercommunal tension, debates over land and political representation, and the friction between local autonomy and centralized authority continued to influence the trajectory of the region, shaping both internal policies and external interventions for decades. The geopolitical landscape created during this period also drew global attention and involvement, setting the stage for the involvement of superpowers, regional alliances, and conflicts that would define much of the 20th and 21st centuries. From wars over territory and ideology to the ongoing struggles over identity, governance, and sovereignty, the Middle East's contemporary challenges cannot be understood without appreciating the decisions, promises, and compromises forged during the aftermath of World War I. By examining this history, we gain more than just a chronological understanding of events. We begin to see how human ambition, diplomacy, cultural complexity, and miscalculation can combine to produce lasting consequences. The story of the Middle East after World War I is a vivid reminder that the interplay between local societies and external powers is often fraught with tension, and that the echoes of early 20th century decisions continue to resonate in the lives of millions today. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this video insightful and want to explore more stories that uncover the roots of our world's most complex issues, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Your support helps us bring more deep-dive documentaries and thoughtful analysis directly to you, helping everyone better understand the world we live in today.